Welcome back to the David Kurten Show on today's News Talk TNT. Now it's really great to have with me Rakib Ehsan, who is a commentator on many media outlets. I think you've been written for the Mail, the Sun, the Spectator, Spiked. You've been on GB News, Talk TV, the BBC. So many shows. So obviously you have a lot of very important things to say, and you were the author of Beyond Grievance: What the Left Gets Wrong About Ethnic Minorities. Now, just to begin with, can you tell us a little bit about that book and some of the things that you wrote in that book, and explain some of the things that the narratives that we get from the left, which the mainstream media is controlled by, and what they're saying.
No, sure. Firstly, David, thank you for having me. Really appreciate the invitation. I
Yeah.
think in terms of the book, one of the main motivating factors behind writing Beyond Grievance, What the Left Gets Wrong About Ethnic Minorities, is I felt that many of the liberal left narratives surrounding the life of ethnic minority families across the country was ridiculously skewed. I think it's overly doom and gloom, exceptionally negative. And I think that I needed to bring some facts to the table. And I think the reality is, and you'll know this better than anyone, David, is that there's many ethnic minority families, they're incredibly proud of their British identity. And many
Mm.
originate from parts of the world where there's rampant political corruption, significant social unrest, indeed, fleeing civil war, and originating from conflict-affected territories. So when they come to the UK, many of those families have naturally positive orientations towards British democracy, which is comparatively very stable, provides their children with ample educational and economic opportunities to thrive. So I think what I wanted to achieve with the book is to say actually Britain ranks quite well when it comes to providing ethnic and racial minorities with the opportunities to start afresh. And when it comes to children who are born and raised in the UK, they still have some of the most greatest opportunities to
Mm.
really maximize their potential.
Well, I mean, that is a fantastic message to get out and is the truth. And I know
Mm,
it. And that what disturbs me about what you often get from the mainstream media, which I would say is almost completely captured by the left or by the Fabians or
mm,
cultural Marxists, whatever you like to call them, is they're continually pushing a victim narrative that everyone
absolutely.
who's an ethnic minority is a victim. And it simply isn't true.
No, it's not. It's not true at all. And I think that many ethnic minority people in the UK find it deeply patronizing and
Mm,
condescending. They don't enjoy being subjected to that kind of what I call hyper paternalism.
mm,
They don't need protection from what I often consider to be, in my view, a fairly mediocre white British liberals with a white savior complex. They don't have any time for that whatsoever. And if you see, David, you'll know this, especially when it comes to education and economic outcomes. Ethnic minorities, for example, originating from India, China, Nigeria, some of the highest performing in the country now, in some
mm.
ways, if truth be told, significantly outperforming their white British peers in the mainstream. That's why I really take issue with these white privilege theories, which essentially racialize disadvantage. I actually think the greatest disadvantage you can have living in the UK, if you don't belong to a stable family unit, if you don't have two parents at home, and if you don't belong to a
Mm.
community where there's intergenerational connection, where young people can really draw on the knowledge and wisdom of their elders in their local neighborhood.
That's absolutely right. I mean, I've been saying that the same thing for a long time. Is it, you look at London and there's a huge amount of crime and there's a
Yeah.
huge amount of gang crime, and tragically, the people that seem to get into it are more susceptible to this are black male teenagers. But then you look at
Mm.
family breakdown; it's much higher among the black community in London than it is among the white community, and it's higher among white people than it is among Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi people. And I actually brought
Absolutely.
that to the mayor as a question, and he just ridiculed that. Like it was like he didn't even accept it, but would just like
Mm.
just made some snide comment. But you're actually affirming that, and that's great.
Well, listen, David, you will also know better than most of the mayor of London. He doesn't struggle to make a fool of himself. in the public domain. Now, it's very clear to me that, and this is uncomfortable territory. Yeah, we have to be honest about this, and I don't bring these facts to the table in order to offend and hurt particular communities.
Mm,
It's because I want to get to the root causes of these problems. And this is not about stigmatizing single parents at all, but the reality is that there's positive youth outcomes which are more strongly related to two-parent households, whether
mm,
that's level of school attainment, then further down the line, level of labour market integration, and more generally, David, general life satisfaction. And I'll just have this statistic here when it comes to England and Wales. 6% of Indian origin children up to the age of 16 live in a lone parent household. 6%. For their Black Caribbean or heritage peers, it goes up to 63%.
wow.
63%. That's nearly two in three children within that particular ethnic category. And if that's not going to have an impact on future educational and economic outcomes, then I don't know what will. That's a very important factor when we're analysing these kind of dynamics. And I think that more generally, when we're talking about the issue of knife crime, especially in London, there's
Mm,
no doubt that if you don't belong to a stable and loving family home, if you don't have a strong, responsible male role model in the household to keep you in the straight and narrow, you'll look for those forms of belonging elsewhere. And unfortunately, I do think that many of the gangs that operate in London, they know who full well which young people are the most vulnerable, which are there for
mm,
the taking in order to do their dirty work. But the problem is when you become trapped in that life of gang membership, increases the likelihood of being involved in criminal activity, including knife-related crime. And we need to have these discussions. They need to be laid out in the table. I'm sorry, but we
mm,
can talk about cuts, we can talk about youth centres and all the rest of it. We need to get back to the basics and understand the value of family culture and stability in terms of shaping
mm.
life chances for young people in this country, David.
I totally agree with it's something that we must talk about. I mean, obviously, I do as leader of the Heritage Party. We got very
Mm,
strong family policies, but it seems that
of
some
course.
political parties, the uniparty, as I call them, they just don't want to talk about it because they're scared of being called racist or they're scared of being called homophobic or misogynist or something, whatever smear you throw at people.
Uh,
I mean, they ignore the facts.
They do, and I think it's a desperation to appear inclusive. Now,
Mm,
I think for me, we need to be honest about, there's certain family structures which are more positively associated with the outcomes that we want to see for young people. I think this argument that a variety of families of all shapes and sizes and structures, they can work very well. But it's about patterns of association. I'm surprised that I still have to
mm,
explain this to the people that I talk to, especially my good friends on the liberal left. But certain things
mm,
work better. And I think those organic forms of social rootedness, that's why I call it, rooted in family, community, and also more generally nation. I think that
mm,
really allows people to thrive, that sense of belonging. It's associated with more positive mental health outcomes as well. And I think that we just need to have these conversations on the table. And I think that the political establishment has really let down the country. And I'll tell you who's let down the country the most, David, politicians who portray themselves to be socially liberal. But if you actually look at their life history, very socially conservative, raised by
mm.
mum and dad at home, which are married. Then they decided, before growing a family of their own, they decided to be married and have their children within wedlock. If it's good enough for them, why isn't it good enough for everyone else? Bigotry of low expectations. I don't like it much at all.
That is something that always puzzles me is that some of the people that seem to be the most progressive, the most liberal, have had the
Mm,
lovely upbringings. I mean, you see it in the same with schools. A lot of people who have been to private schools and grammar schools, and then they
indeed.
say, "Oh no, but we want to close down grammar schools
Mm,
because nobody should go to them," where they've had the
mm,
benefit of them, and it's the same with families. And
absolutely.
I don't understand it myself, but why would they not want the best and greater opportunities for everybody? It's bizarre to
Absolutely,
me.
it's rank hypocrisy.
Mm,
It shows how dangerous ideological dogma can be. That
mm,
you suggest that this is not good enough for other people, or that this is absolutely fine for other people, but I would never do it myself. I think another
mm,
example is drugs. If truth be told,
mm,
have there's politicians who support a very liberal policies when it comes to drugs, drug liberalization more generally. But if they found out that their children were taking drugs, you can be sure that they wouldn't be very happy about it at all.
mm. Yeah, indeed. Indeed. Now, obviously, immigration is a big issue
Mm,
in the UK at the moment. Both illegal migration, with asylum seekers coming across
Indeed.
the channel and legal migration, which has hit record levels. And we hear this week that over half the overseas development budget is being spent on housing
Mm,
asylum seekers who've come across the channel, which last year was I think 30,000, the year before
mm.
45, 44,
45.
45,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're spending 5.4 billion this year, in this fiscal year, on housing asylum seekers. I mean, what do you make of this? What should be done about this issue?
Firstly, what a fundamental policy failure that
Mm,
our international development budget is being drained,
mm,
essentially by illegal economic migration. I know that many people say that, or the majority of people that are crossing the channel, they have their cases accepted and their asylum claims. That just shows me we have a very loose and overly relaxed asylum system. And I think the
mm,
issue here, David, and I think it's a very important point to make. I want to see an asylum system which prioritizes women and children at risk of sexual violence in their homelands, the people
mm,
who are very most at risk of persecution and sex-based violence. They're being left by the wayside, mainly by male-dominant illegal immigration on the English South Coast.
mm,
This is a social justice issue. Forgive me for using quite progressive language, but it
mm,
really is. And I think that with the international development budget, that should be used. For example, the UK in partnership with other Commonwealth member countries which are relatively underdeveloped to develop their economies to move towards being more economically self-sufficient. So
mm,
and that budget's being drained. If truth be told, and I think that the amount of public money that's been spent in terms of rehoming illegal migrants in up to four-star hotels in areas where there's shockingly poor standards of social housing is again a grave injustice. In terms of what needs to be done, and this is something that I never thought I'd say, I think that Britain needs to really reevaluate its relationship with existing international treaties and conventions, especially when it comes to human rights and refugee policy. Because I think for me, there's been far too much supranational intrusion when it comes to deciding our own matters of immigration and asylum policy. And I think
mm,
David, my background is social cohesion. I think that without a well-ordered immigration asylum regime, we won't be able to cultivate the levels of social solidarity we need, especially when it comes
mm.
to supporting the sustainability of the welfare state. So I think on the left, there's some very important discussions to be had, but all too often they're being brushed aside, and I think that's going to do them not many favors at all moving into the future.
Well, it's really refreshing to hear you say these things, which I think,
Mm,
most people in the country who are affected by this and, live in towns and cities where there is
absolutely,
a big change in,
huge.
demographics and an increase in population as well. I mean, just
Mm,
simply in terms of mathematics, there is not the infrastructure to cope with the influx of people who are coming into the
absolutely,
country. I mean, and people see this, and then all they get from politicians, of whether it's fake conservatives or Labour
mm,
Party, left
fake
or right in
conservatives.
Parliament, is like, you're a racist. Shut up and take it.
Oh,
Stop being racist.
absolutely. Absolutely. I
Mm,
think the environment's become so censorious. Now, David,
mm,
I'm a Bangladeshi Muslim heritage, and I'm proud of my
mm,
ethnic heritage and my faith as well. I
mm,
recently celebrated Eid al-Fitr.
mm,
For me, though, what I really find quite depressing is how people want to express perfectly legitimate concerns. People have paid taxes all their lives, and they're right to feel at least somewhat anxious. They're trying to be honest about how
mm,
they feel, anxious about the pace of demographic social change in their local communities, and asking questions about whether the local social infrastructures there are able to cope with such an influx of newcomers, including newcomers who, for example, may not have the strongest English language skills, not the highest levels of English language
mm.
proficiency, and they may also originate from cultures where the prevailing social norms are very different to what we have in British liberal democracy. And I think those conversations need to be had, because if we're very serious about integrating our diverse communities, having strong amounts of social cohesion, then without having those conversations, we won't be making much headway at all.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just illegal migration as well. I totally agree with you on that. We see the
Mm,
majority of people coming over on boats and on the backs of lorries are military-aged men, if you like. There's not older men. There's some children, but there's hardly any women coming across. But there's
mm.
also a huge problem with legal migration. I mean, this has
Oh,
now
there
got
is.
out of control. Now 1.4 million coming into the country, and as an absolute number, 700,000 net. I mean, that is a huge challenge, this is overwhelming societies as well. I mean, do you see that having as much of an effect on social integration as the illegal migration, or is there a difference there?
I think my main concern is that within your immigration system, you want to attract the brightest and the best.
Mm.
Unfortunately, I'm not seeing much evidence of that. If I'm being truthfully
Yeah.
honest, and I think it's the sheer scale. And I think the issue is that for decades, the British political establishment has sought to use immigration as a lever to pull at any opportunity to engineer for quick economic growth. Firstly, it
Mm.
hasn't done that. We've been a high immigration, low growth economic model. We've been attached to that for a long
Yeah.
time. And I think the main worry for me, David, is that we're not skilling our own people.
Yes.
That's the
Yes.
truth of it. We need to boost the skills in our own domestic workforce. I
Mm.
said that, in every left behind provincial town, I'd plonk in a sort of German style vocational college there, really boost
Mm.
skills. And I
Yeah.
think we need to reverse that culture of snobbery towards certain trades. I mean, the
Yeah.
many tradesmen across the country, they do things that I couldn't possibly do. If I tried to do it, I'd probably blow up my own house in the process, right? And I think their
Yeah.
values really need to, their skill sets need to be deeply appreciated a lot more.
Absolutely.
And in my view, the main thing is we need to focus on national self-sufficiency. Stop trying to look for
Yes.
external forces to sort out your problems. And I think if we have those conversations, we'll be in a much better place.
Rakib, I totally agree with you. It sounds like you're actually reading out the Heritage Party manifesto. Self-sufficiency and skills. Absolutely what we need. Low immigration. Bring some people over. It's good to have some people. It's good to
Of
mix things up a
course,
little bit, but we need to make life work for everybody who's here and put
indeed,
British people first, and then the country will
absolutely.
be better for people who arrive as well. Rakib, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Hope you can come back on the show again sometime soon. Thanks for joining me. This is today's News Talk,
Thank you.
TNT.